For this week's video, we're going to be going over a right chest wall case. So a couple things before we start planning. First of all, you'll see two different types of chest walls. Sometimes you'll see with an expander like this, a tissue expander, and sometimes without. You plan them, pretty much the same way though. Sometimes without the expander, it can be pretty difficult to plan since the chest wall gets very thin. But the general process is still the same. Next is just a couple notes on contours. So I'll have you guys complete the rest of this contour list, but to plan, I just need to do a couple things here first. So the scar, I won't do the whole scar contour right now, but you guys will need to do the scar so you have it set up for next week's plan, which will use this same data set. But usually for the scar, I use a brush, usually 0.6 or so, and I like to overdo my contour. There's really no reason not to slightly over contour this wire. The wire is just a approximation, of that scar on the patient, right? So I slightly overdo it. It makes it easy for you to see if you print kind of a view. The reason why the scar is important is for the boost. We're going to do an electron boost on this scar. And a lot of times you'll print that cutout for the therapist. And if you over contour a little bit, it's just easier to see. But also it helps if you slightly over contour it and then override the density. It just makes sure you pick up all that high density from that scar, and it won't affect your electron plan. And the reason it's important to do now is once we calculate our initial plan on this data set, you can't modify the body contour or the density of anything without uncalculating your initial plan. You can copy the data set and you can have a separate data set for your boost plan, but I think it's just cleaner to have one data set. So it's important to do this ahead of time. So you can see I already modified the body. I already removed the scar from the body. So you'll want to do that too. Then you'll also want to contour that wire like I just did now. Come into properties, set that CT value to 0. I set it to 0 because you can see I slightly contour inside the body, right? So I'm just overriding it to a density of, water or tissue. And Eclipse the way Eclipse works is it will not see any density outside the body. So even though I overrode this wire to 0 and it's outside the body, Eclipse won't take anything outside the body into account. So that's why I do both. I remove it from the body, slightly over contour it just to make sure I get it all, and then I override to water. If I overrode to air, because I contoured into the body a little bit, I would be removing extra tissue, right? I don't want to do that. So that's why I do water. Next is, because we have these expanders in here, we get all this artifact, right? And that's just what the expander looks like. It has this big metal insert in here, and it creates all this artifact. So we need to clean that up a little bit. I'm gonna clean up my body a little bit here too. I can see that looks okay. Okay, so the way I do this is as soon as I start to see artifact, right around here, I do a pretty generous contour. I'm just gonna go all the way around the body, and all of this area that's getting artifact, I'm gonna contour it out. Like that. I'm going to interpolate. Okay, then I'm going to remove parts extending outside of the body. So all this outside of the body, I'm going to remove that and make sure my margin is 0. Okay, so I just removed outside the body. So the reason I do it that way is just faster, right? I just do a generous contour and then I just crop everything outside the body. Next, we need to contour out this metal part. So right now I would be overriding that metal part, but the metal is there, right? We're just cleaning up all this artifact that's created in the CT due to the metal part right here. So let's go to our bone window. And you can't perfectly see, you know, the shape of that metal because it artifacts so bad, but you can get pretty close, kind of, and you know, we're just gonna estimate the best we can. So basically, right now I would be overriding all that metal, right? I'm gonna crop a hole in this override contour. So now I have this hole, so I'm going to override everything around that metal piece. And you know, I'm just approximating. I know there's this big round metal piece in here. It's probably not quite as big as it's showing on the CT because of all this artifact, but it's probably something like that. Okay, and then same thing, I'm gonna come into properties. I'm gonna just override to HU value of 0. There we go. Okay, the rest, you know, pretty self-explanatory. These are the contours you need done in order to do this plan. All right, let's get going. Change my window level back to abdomen. You can also use breast. A lot of times I just like to look at abdomen better, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, let's insert our plan. I usually choose a superclav as my target, but really any of these three would work. And I'm going to use 6x for now. All right, let's make a DRR. Okay, so where do we put our isocenter? So this Chisel plan, we're going to introduce a new concept here. We're going to use a monoisocenter for both our superclav and axilla fields and our chest wall fields, which will make more sense here in a little bit. So we're going to do a monoisocentric technique. There is a dual isocenter technique for chest wall plans or breast with lymph node plans. If you guys do that dual isocenter technique in your clinic, let me know and I can create a video on that to help you guys out. I average probably less than one a year that I plan like that. So I don't think it's worth really going over, but it could come up. And certainly if you guys run into that in your clinics, if you do a dual isocenter technique for these, let me know and we'll make some videos and go over that too. Okay, so the first thing I do to get started is I'm gonna look at my DRR here. I'm gonna move my isocenter about to the bottom of the clavicle right here. So you can see I'm about to the bottom, and I want it to be about 1 cm in from the rib here and 1 cm right here. So I'm gonna just move it to the edge, about right here. I'm going to rotate my gantry 15 degrees. I'm going to set my SSD to 95. So this is a little bit of a Before we used to do volumetric planning for these, we set up our fields strictly based on anatomical landmarks, okay, and that's how we made sure we covered the right nodes and the right areas. We used bony anatomy a lot of times to set up these fields, and so this is kind of mixing a little bit of that with volumetric planning. But back in the day, before we had these PTV volumes to plan to, you would put your ISO kind of at the bottom of the clavicle, 1 cm inside the rib cage like this. You'd rotate your gantry, between 10 and 20 degrees, kind of depends how your physician likes to do it. And then you'd set your SSD to 95. That's still how I kind of get started. That's still kind of generally how I place my initial isocenter location. But then I turn my volumes on and use them to set my blocks. So bring my block over here, just laterally make sure I include those volumes. I come up here. I did contour the spinal cord for everyone just to make sure we're using the same one. And we need that just to make sure we're not treating the spinal cord with our superclav field here. Okay, so I got my borders set up a little bit. Why 1? Instead of dragging that around, I'm going to actually type 0 in here because we need this to be perfectly 0. We need a perfectly flat beam here on the bottom, which I'll explain why here in a second. We rotate that 15 degrees so that we can treat our superclav nodes here and miss our cord. If we were coming in at 0 degrees, we'd have to treat through the cord to get all these nodes. So that's why you come off axis a little bit with that gantry angle. Let's add an MLC. And again, this is how we plan in our clinic. It should be fairly similar to how you guys plan in your clinic, assuming you plan these volumetric. If not, the fields would look pretty similar even if we set these up, with just bony anatomy or something like that. But your blocks might look slightly different than mine. But kind of like our breast planning, we're going to come right to the edge of our PTV here. I'm going to come slightly below the bottom of the field here. I'm going to come up. We're going to block out this humeral head here. I'm going to go just kind of straight up from there and over. So again, this part, you might do it slightly different in your clinics, but the general principles of planning is still going to be the same. So a lot of times I come slightly under my my bottom jaw here because it just helps. I feel like if you open your MLCs up down here, your jaw is still covering, but if you open those MLCs, it just helps get dose to the bottom of this field, which again, I'll explain that more in a little bit here. So I'm going to make sure I close this jaw as much as possible against the widest MLC here. That's our superclav field. A lot of people plan with just this this anterior superclav field. I'm going to show you planning with a posterior field too. Again, your clinic might operate a little differently. So if you have questions about your specific clinic's way of planning these, let me know. I've planned them, a ton of different ways. I'm just kind of working off how Nebraska Medicine / UNMC does these. So to create that posterior field, I'm going to oppose this one. And I'm going to show you guys another little trick that I like to do that helps these plans look quite a bit better. So I'm actually going to rotate this posterior field's collimator to 90. All right, I'm going to rotate to 90, and then let's redraw this. So I need to reset up these boundaries. I don't know if you noticed, but before I rotated to 90, I I aligned the medial MLC edge. So I opposed, and then I adjusted my gantry angle so that the medial edge was lined up, the MLC edge, so this orange edge lined up. So that's how I found my new posterior gantry angle, okay? You want to line those up so we don't have any divergence to the body over here on the left side. Okay, I readjusted my jaws, okay, around these volumes, and we're going to draw our field just like we did on the anterior side. I'm going to block this humeral head, come straight up. We're going to follow the edge of this superclav. That comes slightly below this bottom jaw again. Now this bottom jaw is X1, so I'm going to come in here, and in X1 I'm going to make sure I type 0, so it's perfectly flat again. Now the only problem with rotating to 90 is this. You see it from our anterior side, we have a very clean edge against our superclav PTV volume over here. With 90 degrees, our MLCs are coming, you know, up and down, so we don't have that clean edge over here. But usually I think it's okay, and I think it's still worth rotating to 90, which you'll see why here once we start planning. So your posterior side should look something like this. Now we need to make our chest wall fields. So this is where the monoisocentric technique comes into play. So to get our chest wall field, I'm going to copy one of these fields, doesn't matter which one. Okay, I'm going to make sure I'm on that new field. So I'm looking at that new field. I'm going to drag this, whoops. So what I did just then is I moved my isocenter. So that's no good. And unfortunately, there is no undo button. So if that happens, you gotta kind of place this back where it was, which can sometimes be a little difficult, but I'm kind of using this medial edge here to get pretty close. So if you remember, our SSD was 95, so I'm gonna just type 95 in. I'm gonna double check the rest of these. Just open this up a little bit. Okay, pretty close to where we were. That's not what I was trying to do. So once again, I have field 3 selected. I did not want to click on my isocenter. I want to click on this little box just so I can drag this Y1 jaw down. So now when we scroll down a bit, we can see this new beam, and this is going to be our tangent. All right, so I'm going to start to rotate this tangent around, and I want it to be kind of parallel with this volume, right? Because we want to treat this chest wall here, but we want to avoid as much, you know, lung and the rest of the body as possible. The problem is with this patient, you can see we have these expanders, right? So a lot of times when you have these expanders, they'll fill up the treatment side and they'll deflate the contralateral side a little bit like this, and they got to do that because if you imagine these expanders looking the same on both sides, it'd be impossible to treat the right side without treating through the left side, and we want to avoid treating through this left side. So they deflate that, give us a little bit more room to work with, but you still want to make sure you're gonna miss this contralateral side. Okay, so a lot of times you have to come in a little steeper than maybe you would want usually to treat this side, but we'll try something like this. So now this Y2, this top edge, this top jaw, I need that to be 0, because the idea is we now have kind of two separate sets of fields, right? We have our superclav and axilla fields up here, and we're going to have our tangents down here, but we want them to be perfectly matched right at our isocenter, right? So our superclav fields perfectly flat at isocenter down here. Our jaw is set at 0. They're going to be perfectly matched to our tangent fields right here with this Y2 jaw set to 0. So they should be perfectly matched, and our dose, we shouldn't have any hot or cold spots. That's a monoisocentric technique. All right. And this tangent field, we're going to draw our MLCs very similarly to how we drew our block last week. Make sure I have at least a couple cm of flash up here. I'm going to draw my block right up against my PTV volume, just like that. Notice I included a little bit of that axilla volume too. Let's double check. Make sure we're not gonna enter through this contralateral breast, and we're pretty close, but I think that's enough room. We should be okay. And always make sure too you don't have too much lung. So again, kind of an old school rule is you didn't want any more than about 2 to 4 cm of lung bite. Usually you want it 2 or less. That still holds true. A lot of places still kind of look at that and stuff, but we also just have DVH constraints that we're going to want to meet too, which I'll give you guys to follow. But anyways, that looks pretty good. So let's oppose that. I'm going to kind of just go right to the middle, and you would normally want to rotate this side. Maybe I can rotate it a tiny little bit. But since our MLCs are very close to just our isocenter, we don't have to adjust that too much. You always want to make sure your flash is okay. You might need to add more flash from that lateral side, or maybe on the bottom, your bottom border, but really looks pretty good, I think, as is. All right, so on a chest wall, the point is we're going to try to treat the skin and then also, the deep tissue, the actual chest wall. So we want to try to use as much low energy as we can, but just like with the normal breast, if our separation gets too high, 24, 25 cm, you might have to sprinkle a little bit of higher energy in, but you want to do that as little as possible, because the idea is to treat the skin and that very, very external bit of tissue. The actual bulk of what we're treating is the expander, right? It's not part of the patient. So we don't so much care about the dose here in the middle. We need good external dose and good deep dose. So anyways, point is, this patient, the separation is only 20 anyways, so 6x is definitely all we're going to be thinking about there. If we come up here though and look at our nodes, so the superclav nodes get fairly superficial up here, so we're going to definitely use 6x from the front side. But this back side, we have all this tissue to travel through from the back. So this posterior superclav / axilla field, we're going to make that 15x. Okay, so our fields are set up. So this is a monoisocentric technique, like I said. Now we can start planning. So what we're going to do is we actually are going to create 2 plans. So we're going to have one plan for these superclav axilla fields up here, and then we're going to have another plan for these chest wall tangent fields down here. So what I do is just copy this plan. Okay, plan 1 will be for the nodes up top. So in plan 1, I'm going to delete my tangent fields. So now we just have those node fields left. Plan 2, I'm going to delete the node fields. So we just have these tangents left. All right. So in plan 1, superclav is my target volume. That's good. We're going to do 200 times 25 as our prescription. For now, I'm going to set this to 95. Let's calculate. Okay, we're gonna leave that as is for now. Let's calculate the second plan. Again, 200 times 25. We want the chest wall to be our target for this one though. So write chest wall PTVE means I need to make a new reference point here. So I'm gonna right click, new reference point. Call it right chest wall PTVE. Select right chest wall PTV as my volume. Now I can delete the location. And I can come in here to reference point organizer and remove that superclav point from this plan. It's still going to be in our other plan, but we removed it from this plan. All right, before we calculate this plan, because we want to treat the skin and that superficial area, we're going to add bolus. So you always plan a chest wall with bolus. Some places will upfront plan like half the fractions, like 12 or 13 fractions with bolus and then 12 or 13 without. Some clinics will plan all fractions with the bolus, and then the physician will decide, based on seeing the patient in clinic while they're on treatment, when to pull that bolus. When the patient's starting to get in too bad of a skin reaction, they'll pull that bolus. So to make things simple, we're going to just plan all fractions with the bolus. So we need to insert new bolus. I always label my boluses with how thick they are, because sometimes you use a 5 millimeter bolus, sometimes a 1 cm thick bolus. Some clinics even have 3 millimeters or 7 millimeters, or kind of some difference. Just to avoid confusion, I always label with how thick I'm going to make that bolus. What I usually do, so a lot of times with bolus, you just end up covering the entire field with the bolus, right? Just to make it easy for the therapist, then they just know, cover that whole field. But for chest walls and breasts and stuff, if we cover the whole field, a lot of times we end up treating a lot of extra skin down here posteriorly than we need to. So a lot of times I put my bolus just kind of mid-sternum. It's an easy anatomical landmark for them to know, right? So they just know the medial border is mid-sternum. And then the lateral border, a lot of times they have a wire marked out, right? A lot of times a physician will just wire out the, where he thinks the edges of where he wants to treat are, the edges of the breast or chest wall area or something like that. A lot of times they mark that on the skin. So I'm going to use that location as my lateral border, and then I can just tell the therapist, that lateral wire mark is one border, mid-sternum is the other border, and then just supinimp, they cover the whole field. So just an example of things you can do. Bolus placement can be tricky, especially if you're doing a custom bolus, but you can kind of find some easy spots like that to help the therapist out. All right, so that's what our bolus looks like. And we need to attach that bolus to both of these fields. So I'm going to link the bolus to one field, right click on the other, link bolus. Now we can calculate. And this is something else to look out for. So you see our dose is cut off right here anteriorly in the bolus. It's because if you click this box right here, show edit calculation volume, you're calculation volume will only be as big as your body contour. So the most anterior part of our body contour is right here. So it's just right up against that body contour. But now we have bolus that kind of extends that. So we just need to move that calculation volume up a little bit. We can then turn it off, calculate again. I just wanted to show you that. That's pretty common. So you'll have to do that for most of these type of cases. Let's normalize for now to 95, 95. All right, so now we have both of our plans calculated. We're not actually going to plan in either of these plans though. What we're going to do is go down up here to insert, new plan sum, select both. All right, so now we have a plan sum, and we're going to actually plan in the plan sum since we get contribution, from both these plans. We can see all the dose one time. You see, when we make a plan sum like this, all the dose lines up here, all they do is they add up both your plans, or however many plans you have in your plan sum. It's just going to add up the total dose. So we need to fix that. So if you right click on dose, come here to isodose levels, what you can do is you can click this scale all button, and then our 100% line is this red line, right? So we can change that back to 5,000. And you can see as soon as we click tab or enter, it'll scale all of those based on how we change that 100 line. So we just scaled everything back down to 5,000, which is what we want. All right. Always good to save, every so often when you're planning these, especially these longer plans. Next important concept to figure out is this one. So right now, our individual plan, our individual superclav plan is normalized so that 95% of our dose covers 95% of our volume. So at any time, so if you're doing an individual plan, if you normalize like that, you'll get exactly that coverage, right? So right now, exactly 95%. Exactly 95% is covering 95% of the volume, right? Because that's how we're specifically normalized. But it's important to note for this plan that you see our isocenter is right at the bottom of that superclav, right? Literally right at the bottom. So we're cold on these bottom few slices on this individual plan, right? But then when you pull this plan sum over, we're not as cold in our plan sum as this plan one because it's getting a little contribution from our tangent fields, right? So the plan sum, if we come here to 95%, 4750, so we're at 95% of our dose, 4750, we're all of a sudden now covering almost 96% of that superclav volume, okay? And so that won't be reflected down here. So you kind of can't use this target normalization anymore because it'll be what's actually happening in your DVH will be different in the plan sum because you're getting contribution from both those plans. All right, so don't let that confuse you. So a lot of times I just put it 95-95 to get me started, right? But then we're gonna switch it to this plan normalization value. Before I do that though, whoops. Before I do that, let's change our field weight. So out of habit, I always filter by each individual plan and just change that to 1. It's just safer if you get in that habit, I think. So I just filter down to each individual plan by itself, change that to 1. All right. Now we can get started here. All right, so on a breast plan, my goal on the breast plan is to get rid of as much 105 as possible, right? Because we want to spare that breast tissue from any additional fibrosis that we may cause with radiation, right? So we're trying to cool it down as much as possible. In the chest wall, all the breast tissue is gone, right? So I no longer care about that 105. So for this plan, we're going to try to get rid of as much 107 as possible, like any other 3D plan I'm trying to do. But really, if we can just get that max dose below 110, we're going to be in good shape. So I'm going to turn my 107 on up here. Now, because my isocenter is right at the bottom of this superclav volume, in order to get that good coverage, the whole field is kind of hot in this case, which is okay. If we move our isocenter down, we're just going to be treating more lungs. So it's always a balance between getting superclav coverage and sparing your lung. So we're going to leave our isocenter alone right now. I'll give you guys lung metrics to follow. So if you have room to move your isocenter a few slices lower than where I have it right now, and you still meet your lung constraints, then you're free to do that. But we're going to try to leave that alone right now. So I have a little extra superclav coverage, right? I'm going to bump this to plane normalization value. We'll leave the chest wall as is right now, but I know I have a little bit of room to lose a little bit of coverage, but not a whole lot, right? And so what I like about rotating that, well, first let's add a field and field to our front one. So like any other plan, I'm going to start adding field and fields to cool this down, right? So before I do that, you can see, you're always a little cold right at the level of your isocenter, right? So these MLCs that we kind of opened up below our match point, right? It helps make your 100% line continuous. So you see how our 100% line never completely goes away? That's good. And I just kind of found that if you open those MLCs a little bit, even though you cover that area with your jaws, you want your jaws to match perfectly, right? So our jaw settings are at 0 and matched perfectly, but I open those MLCs behind the jaw, and it just helps make that 100% line continuous. A lot of times if you don't do that, it'll break up. And really we're just introducing just a little bit of extra scatter dose, a little bit of extra, leakage, basically. It's just enough to get that 100% line to kind of stay continuous. But some clinics might not like that. But anyways, we're gonna try. So we're gonna try this out. We're blocking a huge percentage of our field, but we are technically leaving a little bit of it alone, right? We do have some open space over here, so we're gonna see how this works. But going back to what I was getting at is a lot of times I won't move this bottom MLC. If you block with this bottom MLC too much, you will start to see that 100 line kind of break up at the level of your isocenter. So a lot of times I won't grab that. Just like always, I'm adding my 3%. Okay, so not too bad. From our posterior side, so this plan is kind of hot, so we don't see it so much, but a lot of times what ends up happening is you get these hot spots that show up like right here or right here, and you don't ever want to block from this medial side. So like from this field, we never want to block over here because this is where we're cold on our superclav, right? Medially we're cold. See that? Because our block edge is right up against that. So we're already cold over here. So if I block from that side, I'm just going to lose coverage and it won't be any good, right? So I always need to block from this side. Well, if I always block from this side, what ends up happening is you can see our 107 and even our 105 is already breaking up, over here laterally a little bit. So I block from my lateral side too much, I end up causing holes here, and sometimes that's no good. So if you rotate this to 90, and you don't always have to do it, I'm just showing it to you on this one because it's just a little trick that I picked up. But now we can block from the top. We don't have to always block from this lateral side. In case holes start to appear, we don't have to block from this medial side. We have just another option. So from this side, can do something like that. So see how it's starting to kind of break up laterally? It's usually what happens, and so if you try to get rid of all this dose from your lateral MLCs like this, you a lot of times just end up causing kind of some cold spots. Okay, so our 107 is going away. We were really close on coverage though, right? So it's a good idea to come check our coverage. Trying to get to 4750, so pretty close. So we're still good. So 4750 is 95%, still covering over 95%. Actually a little bit more than what we started with, so still okay there. We don't have any, holes really showing up laterally yet, so I think we can keep blocking with this field 1. Alright, before we do another one, let's check our axilla dose. So superclav, we want 95% to cover 95%. That's our goal. For this axilla, we want 95% to be covered by 45 gray or more. So over 95% here, over 45 gray, so we're good there. So let's do one more from this field 1. Maybe do that. Alright, so basically all gone. We have a couple spots 107, but that's okay. If we look at 95% here, 95%, so still over 45 gray. Look at 95% of our superclav. We need that to be above 4750. So we are good on that. It looks good. It's gonna start to break up once you hit the lung here and get closer to your isocenter, but that's to be expected. That's normal. All right, now on to our tangent fields. So the first thing we do on any plan, you know, I kind of looked at that a little bit. I just didn't mention it up here, but you always adjust your weighting if you need to. You know, we could maybe slightly add a little bit more lateral dose on this. There we go, looks maybe a little better. Let's turn these off, turn our chest wall on. So again, we need that 95, so at 95%, we need to be above 4750. We're, you know, well above that. Sorry, okay. So I think just leaving it at this normalization is going to be okay, 81.11. If we look at our beam's eye view, I don't know. It's always good to get as best coverage as you can, right? So we can maybe do a little bit better than what we're doing. Let's start with 80. I think we can still get rid of all that 107. All right, just like any other plan, we start cranking away our field and fields. Grab this other part from the medial edge. See if we can start doing 4%. So we have these spots kind of showing up, you know, immediately. It's just, I know, just, you know, that calculation's kind of rounding monitor units. So the plan's actually heated up a little bit, but that's okay. We're gonna adjust our normalization at the end. it'll kind of get rid of all those for us. Getting close, maybe just one or two more. All right, so 5,500 is 110%. So our max dose is 5491. So we are under 110. Let's just check coverage here. Coverage looks very good. So 95% is well over 95% of our dose. So we do have room here. So you can see all that kind of extra 107 that popped up right while we were planning. We can get rid of most of that by just normalizing back up a little bit. See, that goes away there. Almost all gone. Our max dose is down to 5420. That's good. But if we needed to, we could, tweak some of these field and fields or these ones and kind of get that max dose even lower if we had to. Now is when you would evaluate your DBH, make sure all your OERs are okay, all of ours should be fine. Double check your coverage, so 95% is well over 95% of our dose. Superclav, still good. And Axilla, still over that 4,500. So we are done planning. Last but not least, you always want to scroll through, review your dose distribution, make sure that 100% line makes you happy. It's all continuous, never breaks up. So all that looks good. I'm going to actually delete this plan sum here. Make sure you don't delete either of your individual plans, right? But what I'm going to do is merge our subfields for both of our plans. Call this one CV_AX for Superclav and Axilla. Merge these fields. Call this right chest wall. So now we have our two merged plans, right? These are the plans that we would get approved by the physician. So then I'm going to recreate that plan sum with those merged plans. I'm going to redo my isodose levels again on this new plan sum. And we're done. So when you guys are done planning, please merge your subfields, label them like this, make only one plan sum for me to review. I only want to see one plan sum of your merged fields. As long as you meet all the constraints and your plan looks pretty similar to what we got here, you'll get full points. If you have any questions, please let me know.